plan to keep the government funded past Friday. Again. So we are on the brink of that again. In weirder news, today was the day the president announced that he would hold some sort of I hate the media anti-awards ceremony. It had originally been scheduled for last week. Then the president rescheduled it for today. Then it didn't end up on the White House schedule, even though it was rescheduled for today. At a White House press briefing today, they said maybe something would happen later. Well, late tonight, they did indeed post something online, a PDF file, so like a document. This is the award ceremony, I guess. Whether or not you care about journalism the president likes versus journalism the president believes should be held up for public ridicule, just the public suspense over whether or not he was really going to do this thing has been a very strange moment. It feels like kind of a hallmark moment, actually, in the unprecedented weirdness of this administration. And of course, the president's denouncing of fake news and calling some journalism fake news, that comes at a time when the real news is queasy making enough. Por ejemplo, despite every fiber in my being rebelling against this idea, tonight we will have some reporting on the new evidence about cash payments allegedly being made to multiple women right before the presidential election to prevent those women from discussing extramarital affairs they allegedly had with the president, or sexual activity they allegedly engaged in with the president, or sexual advances they allege came from the president. You know, a year ago, Barack Obama was president. The prospect of there being an opening to a national newscast like the one I just did would be so unthinkable even 1 year ago. You'd check yourself into a doctor if you found your mind unaccountably skittering into a gutter like that's what the news would sound like. But this is our life now. This is our nightly news now about the American presidency. You know, one of the things that used to happen in the news were those great sign-offs, remember? I mean, not all of them, but a lot of the greats over the years in American TV news, they had these little taglines they would sign off with.
That's the way it is.
Good night and good luck.
Dan Rather, courage.
And so it goes.
Good night, Chet. Good night, David.
I always wanted it to be good night, Chet. Good night, David. No, good night, Chet. Good night, David. I always kind of wanted them to compete about it. News anchors don't really do those sign-offs anymore. One of the ways I know that I will never be one of the greats is because last night at the very end of this show, I think I got as close as I will ever get to my own signature news sign-off. I didn't plan on it, didn't script it, certainly. It was absolutely an ad lib based on breaking news, happened right at the end of the show. I think this is as close as I will ever get. His lawyer that he has retained for this Russia stuff, who was with the day at House Intelligence, his lawyer is also the lawyer on Russia matters for the White House counsel, who was the person who was presumably advising Steve Bannon not to talk to that committee today. Having somebody on those two different sides of this story, both represented by the same attorney, that's weird. That does it for us tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow. That's my sign-off. That's weird. Complete with cartoonish grimace. I guess that's my signature good night for Trump era on TV news. I'm sure somebody has already trademarked that's weird, but if not, we should totally do it. The story I was talking there about at the very end of last night's show ended up being not just a weird thing we noticed in last night's news. It ended up being really important today in terms of what has just happened in the biggest scandal involving this presidency. I finished the show last night exclaiming over the weirdness of this fact. Today, we figured out something that is not ran the Donald Trump campaign after Paul Manafort was fired and after Corey Lewandowski was fired. I mean, from the outside looking in, it would seem rationally that there might be a conflict there, right? For that same lawyer to represent multiple people who represent different interests in this investigation. That said, we can report tonight, because NBC News has learned tonight, that the special counsel's office, Robert Mueller's office has now advised that lawyer, whose name is William Burke, that as far as the special counsel's investigation is concerned, it's fine for him to represent Steve Bannon and those other Trump officials. Now that we know that Steve Bannon will soon be meeting with Mueller and his prosecutors, I have to say, though, it's not clear that he'll use that same lawyer to represent him through his interactions with the special counsel.
Sixth largest economy fighting Trump administration policies on everything from legal marijuana to taxes to the environment.
California is not waiting for Trump. We're not waiting for all the deniers.
And the escalating fight over immigration.
We're going to fight and we're going to win.
California now an immigrant sanctuary state. A new law limiting cooperation between local, state, and federal law enforcement. Prank road signs welcomed drivers to seemingly another country, the land of illegals.
If the politicians in California don't want to protect their communities, then ICE will.
The acting head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement on Fox News said California politicians who made the law should be held personally accountable. Politicos here aren't worried.
Have you ever seen the enmity between California and D.C. like it is today?
I wouldn't call it enmity. There are certain policies that are radical departures from the norm, and California will fight those.
The immigrant community finding its voice in the era of Trump.
We're actually working harder and galvanizing more people for justice.
A daughter of Mexican immigrants, East LA activist Lydia Avila says the president, his rhetoric and policies have only emboldened her community.
This is a movement that's not going to be stopped. The president cannot win. He may be there now, but he's not going to be there forever. We're going to win.
Equally galvanized the entertainment industry with its deep pockets and powerful voice.
The power of an idea to change the way people think and change the way people feel is really what's important. That's really what we're fighting for.
Jeremy Zimmers, CEO of United Talent Agency, one of the world's largest, says Trump represents a threat to the idea of America.
We all see that the freedoms and the life we assume we have, the incredible privileges we have to be, raised in this country, to live in this country, we all see that, how fragile it can be.
Allison, hi.
Cheryl Conti, an activist in the tech community, says it is a fight over principles.
I think that you're going to find Californians be completely unapologetic about, fighting for what we see as California values.
Working from home on her pedal desk, one-foot soldier among millions across the Golden State, countering, resisting Trump.
Now, to give you a sense of where things are between the Trump administration and California right now, President Trump is the first president not to visit the Golden State in his first year in office since Dwight D. Eisenhower. That was back in the 1950s. The activist I spoke to says all of their money, lots of money here in California, all of their energy and their technical skills will go to those midterm elections, not only here in California, but across the country. Erin?
All right, Miguel, thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Don't forget, you can watch Out Front anytime, anywhere. You just have to go to CNN Go. AC 360, though, starts right now with Anderson.
Good evening. Tonight, keeping them honest on immigration, the border wall, and how the White House was reportedly directing what Steve Bannon did and did not answer in front of Congress. What he said may not surprise you, but the fact that he said it will. Candidate Trump's pledge on the wall was uninformed. We're joined tonight by one of many lawmakers who were actually in the room when Kelly said that. There's also breaking news in the Russia investigation, more new reporting on something Steve Bannon reportedly let slip to the House Intelligence Committee, and what went on inside that hearing room. We begin, though, tonight, keeping them honest, with immigration and a possible government shutdown.
Mr. President Trump, if there's a government shutdown, whose fault would it be?
What's the dreamers?
We're working on it. We're working on it.
Well, the president late today on Capitol Hill, leaving an award ceremony for retired Senator Bob Dole, saying we're working on it. Earlier today, though, his press secretary seemed to be working on something else, namely, who gets the blame if the government shuts down.
The president certainly doesn't want to shut down, and if one happens, I think you only have one place to look, and that's to the Democrats, who are holding our military and our national security hostage by trying to push through other policies that have nothing to do with the budget.
Well, the policy she's talking about is the one protecting so-called dreamers as part of a budget deal to keep the lights on, which is true. It also is true that Republicans control the House and Senate and may simply try to pass legislation minus any language on DACA or anything else, funding the government for another month or so. In any case, though, Sarah Sanders' attempt to shift blame begins to come unglued when you look at who's on record calling for what she's about to blame Democrats for. And I quote, "Either elect more Republican senators in 2018 or change the rules now to 51%. Our country needs a good shutdown in September to fix mess." That is the president back in May, and here's Sarah Sanders being confronted with that today.
He just said that the president certainly doesn't want a shutdown. Last year, he tweeted that a shutdown would be a good thing. So what caused his views?
He said it'd be good politics.
Good
yeah. Look, that's never been a preference of this administration. It wasn't then. It isn't now. And again, if that does happen, the blame, the fault will all lie at one place because we would like to see a budget deal happen.
Sarah Sanders saying that what the president meant back then was that shutdown would be good politics. That's not what he said, though. Again, in May, quote, "Our country needs a good shutdown. The country needs it." And now, according to Sanders, that's not what he meant at all.
It's never been a preference of this administration. It wasn't then. It isn't now. And again, if that does happen, the blame, the fault will all lie at one place because we would like to see a budget deal happen.
So those two positions, wanting a shutdown, never wanting one, are obviously at odds with one another. It's not so strange in a way. Today and in recent weeks, we've seen evidence that the president either is not clear or has not made clear what he really wants in the way of a deal on immigration. As you know, just last week, in the space of a minute or two, he told a bipartisan group of lawmakers that he favored the Democratic version of immigration reform. Then he agreed to a harder-line Republican provision. He later hosted the authors of a bipartisan immigration compromise, then somehow allowed a group of hardline lawmakers to show up and talk him out of a compromise. He sent mixed signals as well about the kind of wall he wants, whether it should span the entire border or not, whether Mexico will pay for it or not. And late today, the Senate's top Republican, clearly a frustrated man, called him out on it.
I'm looking for something that President Trump supports, and he's not yet indicated what measure he's willing to sign. As soon as we figure out what he is for, then I would be convinced that we were not just spinning our wheels going to this issue on the floor, but actually dealing with a bill that has a chance to become law and therefore solve the problem.
As soon as we figure out what he's for, he said, a quote from the Senate Majority Leader. But if you believe Sarah Sanders today, he does know who he wants to blame, which is also pretty rich when you listen to what her boss, the president, said about an immigration deal just last week.
I'll take all the heat you want to give me, and I'll take the heat off both the Democrats and the Republicans. My whole life has been heat. I like heat in a certain way, but I will. I mean, you are somewhat more traditional politicians than me. 2.5 years ago, I was never thinking in terms of politics. Now I'm a politician. You people have been doing it, many of you, all your lives. I'll take all the heat you want, but you are not that far away from comprehensive immigration reform.
I'll take the heat, he says. Now, according to Sanders, the president and the White House, they are already out of the kitchen. Joining us now is CNN's Phil Mattingly with the latest on the blame game and the rather stunning admission made by Chief of Staff Kelly that candidate Trump was, quote, uninformed about the wall and overpromised to build as a candidate. So what's the reaction there on Capitol Hill about this, Phil?
Anderson, I think it's important to consider the context as much as you do the content right now, where this meeting was actually taking place and who it was taking place with. Chief of Staff John Kelly has had not a great relationship with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, to say the least. This goes back to when he was Secretary of Homeland Security, Kelly. Some heated meetings, some heated discussions. And on the issue itself specifically, the wall, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus has made very clear. They find this to be one of the most divisive, if not the most divisive issues that the president has talked about throughout the campaign, throughout the issues that he's focused on. This was a severely problematic issue for the caucus. And John Kelly saying that this was something where the president was simply uninformed when he wanted to talk about a wall that spanned border to border was an admission that the Congressional Hispanic Caucus found obviously very interesting. But it's also something I think it's worth noting, Anderson, that as you pointed out, underscores the reality here on Capitol Hill. What the president wants in any potential DACA resolution, in any potential DACA deal, is up for open debate. Nobody has a great idea. How big does the wall have to be? Is it a wall system? Is it just technology? Is it barriers? Move away from the wall. What he wants on family migration, what he wants on visa lotteries, all of these issues, Anderson, are very up in the air. And it's what's complicating everything right now on Capitol Hill.
And how much closer is Congress to making a deal?
In terms of DACA, they're not close at all. I think just to state plainly. Right now, there's the Gang of Six bill that's out there, the bipartisan bill that the president has summarily rejected, Republican leadership has summarily rejected. There's a bipartisan proposal in the House, got its first mention on the Senate floor today. That hasn't necessarily picked up a lot of steam, at least with the top leaders. I think a lot of people are wondering if perhaps that could come to the forefront. But the reality here is this. So long as the president doesn't get behind something, Republican leaders aren't going to get behind something. Anderson, if Republican leaders don't get behind something, particularly when they're saying they don't feel like the deadline is there, they don't feel like there's urgency there is no question. The pathway forward for a DACA resolution as it currently stands, it's non-existent.
Phil Mattingly, appreciate the reporting. More now on Chief of Staff Kelly's meeting with members of the Hispanic Caucus and his remarks on the wall. We're joined by caucus member and Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez. Thanks for being with us. Congressman, this meeting today with John Kelly, can you just explain exactly what he said about some of the president's positions as a candidate, particularly regarding the wall? Did he actually use the word uninformed?
Here's how I remember it, Anderson. He was talking, he said, you know, the president promised the wall 50 feet high from sea to shining sea. That's not going to happen. He said, he stopped talking about wall and started calling it barrier. And said, in some places the barrier would be the fact that it's so inhospitable, no one would come through there. That's the wall. Other places it would be a drone. Other places it would be border security agent. Other places it might be a concrete wall. But he said, look, think of it as barrier. And here's what I think the most telling thing is, he shared with us that when he said the president made promises during the campaign about the wall, and those promises were not informed promises. And that he, as the chief of staff and former head of DHS, has educated the president and informed the president, and his position now have evolved, because he says, look, I've told the president, I've talked to governors, and I've talked to Congress people, and I've talked to mayors, and we just cannot build this concrete wall. And so, and that was, just so it's clear, that was in response to a question that we asked, could you please tell us what you mean by a wall? Because intuitively, we thought that was something that was still not exactly clear.
It's been reported that Kelly also said he was optimistic about Congress getting a DACA deal done. Did he give you any timeline? Did you get us any sense that the White House is open to including a DACA solution in the short-term spending bill?
Anderson, here's what I think. I think here's what he did say. He said, the Dreamers can stay. That's done. Permanent residency, citizenship, they're not going anywhere. We're done. And he repeated that 3 times in a very unequivocal terms. But then, just as quickly, he said, we need a wall. We need billions of dollars for a wall. We need you to end what he calls chain migration, which everybody in the room felt very offended by that term. He says we need to end chain migration, which is family-based visas. That's where you unite. That's where, I don't know, I show up and I say, you know what, I'd really like my dad, because that'd be a good thing for me to have as an immigrant. And I want my brothers, and I want my wife and children, so we can build a family. I shared with him that I found it extraordinary that the president would say that, since he inherited the business from his dad. And he has the business, and his children are going to inherit. The Trump family has made family-based decisions on their business, and that's what immigrants want, right? We come and we bring our parents, and we create businesses and opportunities. And I thought for a moment, wow, he said, I believe in merit-based immigration. And I said to myself, does he understand that he's talking to 25 members of Congress, almost all of whom are here because their moms and dads came here, most low-skilled jobs, and now we're members of Congress and our kids are going to college, and I expect Luis Andres, my grandson, to be a neurosurgeon one day. That's the way America is truly built.
Is there any way you could vote yes on a short-term spending bill that doesn't have a permanent solution for DACA recipients?
No, Anderson, I think look, every day, and I'm happy you asked that question, because a lot of times we get into the, how would I say, the making of the bill, and we forgot who we're fighting for. Here's one of the things that Secretary Kelly told us. Chief of Staff Kelly told us. He said, that Graham and Durbin working together, that's not bipartisan. I need you to go and work with Cotton and Perdue and with those people who actually don't believe in immigration. And I thought to myself, well, that's not going to lead to anywhere. That's like saying, Luis, why don't you go and fight for reproductive rights, and why don't you join Republicans who believe that a woman doesn't have a right to abortion, even in the case of rape and incest, and come back with a compromise? Well, you know what you're going to get? Absolutely nothing, and stalemate. And so that's what he's talking about. So I think it speaks to the naivete and how just uninformed Chief of Staff Kelly is. If you really want to reach an agreement between people who believe in immigration and believe the system should be reformed and improved, and those who want to shut down immigration forever in this country, you're never going to reach a solution. So I would hope that Chief of Staff Kelly would see that that was really a genuine proposal, that Durbin and Graham, that's bipartisanship. That's Democrats and Republicans putting the country ahead of party. And I think that is bipartisan, and it's what we need to applaud.
Congressman Gutierrez, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next, our political team on what White House Chief of Staff Kelly said and what this all means. And later, all the breaking news on Steve Bannon and what he told the House Intelligence Committee. So at a crucial moment for the president, his party, the country, the man who's supposed to have the president's back tells lawmakers that his boss was not informed about his signature campaign issue. Joining us from the left and the right, respectively, Paul Begala and Jack Kingston. Paul, I guess my question is, I mean, the president hasn't shifted all that much from his campaign promises. He still wants a wall, albeit maybe a shorter one, or maybe they're not going to call it a wall. So does that mean he still holds uninformed positions in General Kelly's eyes?
Apparently in General Kelly's eyes, and he would know best. After all, he was the Secretary of Homeland Security before he became the White House Chief of Staff. It is sort of news from nowhere. I mean, the American people, through the Electoral College and the help of Mr. Putin and Mr. Comey, they selected this man. And he's our first president in American history with no prior experience in government or in the military. And so I think it's understandable in a sense that he doesn't really know. Now, he's been in there a year. He should know now because this was his signature promise. We will build a wall and we will make Mexico pay for it. Well, we're not going to build a wall, and Mexico's not going to pay for it. Whatever happens, the American taxpayers are going to have to pay for it. This is, I think, it's why he's down to 38%. You know, he got 46% when he won the election. He's down to 38 now. So a whole lot of Trump voters who stood with him all through all those travails of the campaign, they've quit on him now. And maybe one of the reasons is they don't like being lied to.
Jack, I mean, you're at the Capitol today. I know you spoke with the president. We got a picture of that. He apparently told you he liked your defense of him on the network, a network which supposedly he never watches, by the way. But that's neither here nor there. What do you make of this, the Kelly's comments? I mean, you know, there were plenty of the Republicans on the stage during those debates who said, you know, who disagreed with the president on this idea of, you know, his vision of the wall.
Well, I think that Paul will recall that there are a lot of presidents who make promises that they can't deliver on, but they get high marks for trying. For example, Barack Obama trying to close down Guantanamo Bay. He actually ended up having a lot of impact on it, but he never closed it, which was his campaign promise. However, he got credit for those who wanted to close it for trying. And I think that one thing that if you talk to base Republicans, the dip in his popularity has nothing to do with the wall not being built. At least that's not the direct issue right now. I think the president is trying. You can tell how difficult it is when you just saw Luis Gutierrez saying that Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin is bipartisan, but working with Tom Cotton is not. That doesn't make sense, but it shows how difficult and how high the emotions are when we're dealing with immigration.
Paul, I mean, to Jack's point, I mean, President Trump would not be the first president to, you know, realize that campaign promises are harder to fulfill than he'd imagine.
Absolutely. I think Jack makes a very good point. The late, great Mario Cuomo famously said, we govern in we campaign in poetry, we govern in prose. But this wasn't an ancillary. It's not Barack Obama saying, I'm going to close down Guantanamo, right? This is the central promise of his campaign. And by the way, it's not all that popular. It is with the Trump base. It is, and we love the Trump base. But by the way, you know what's even more popular with the Trump base? Regularizing the status of the Dreamers. Jeffrey Guerin, a Democratic pollster whose quality control standards are as high as anybody I know in the business, just finished a poll. He surveyed 12 Senate battleground states, 10 of which Trump carried. So this is not exactly blue America. And among Trump voters, 68% of Trump voters want to regularize the status of the Dreamers, welcome them into America, and make their status here permanent. That's an easy win for the president. It's something that even his base, which he says he's all about, really, really wants. So, Mr. President, just cut the deal with the Democrats. Let these Americans, who they really are morally Americans, let them stay and live the American dream.
But I think, though, Paul, that when you ask that question somewhat in a vacuum, do you want to legalize a small child who came here through no fault of his own many years ago and grew up in America? I'd say, yeah. In fact, I would say it's probably even 95% people want to do something about that. But when you ask people the big question of, we have 1 million legal immigrants to America a year, 15% are skilled-based, 60% are simply because of family. What do you want to do what do you want to do about that? When you start talking about visa lottery, 50,000 random people who just happen to win a lottery, who, because of chain migration, account for another 165,000 a year. And then when you start just looking at the job displacement of Americans and driving the wage rate down, the competition for entry-level jobs, I think there's a lot more to the immigration question than that poll would reveal. And I think that's why the president's having these issues with dealing with Congress.
It's not.
I want you to be able to respond just quickly, and then we got to go, Paul.
He's having issues because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, Jack. It's not like he's so in the weeds on. Excuse me, I did not interrupt you. The president could easily help almost 700,000 people who deserve to stay here and that all Americans want to stay here and get a political win, but he can't get out of his own way because he's incompetent. By the way, it's the best thing about Donald Trump is that he's incompetent. Thank God he doesn't have his arms around all the power that he actually could be exercising to pursue his agenda.
There goes our
All right.
highbrow
Well, I got to leave it there. We'll get some breaking news on the unfolding Russia investigation. That's coming up. Is the White House actively working to limit testimony to any and all congressional investigators into Russian meddling in the 2016 election? And that seems to clarify what went on yesterday at House Intelligence Committee hearing, where Steve Bannon invoked executive privilege rather than answer questions about President Trump and the Russia investigation. Now, Bannon, by the way, has agreed to be interviewed by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. And we're going to talk with Intelligence Committee Chairman Congressman Eric Swalwell in just a bit. But first, CNN Chief Political Analyst Gloria Borger joins us with the details on what she has been learning. So what have you found out about exactly what went on during this hearing with Bannon yesterday?
Well, can you imagine the committee finally gets Steve Bannon after Michael Wolff's book, for which Bannon was a major source, and called Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting in Trump Tower treasonous. You know, they finally get him behind closed doors, Anderson, and they want to ask him about what happened during the transition and during his time inside the White House. And instead, they are met with, I can't answer this question. I'd like to answer this question. I really can't answer this question. And what they find is that his lawyer, during breaks, is conferring with the White House counsel's office to figure out whether answers to some of these questions would be in violation of potential executive privilege. And so it got pretty heated.
The White House says it's cooperating with all of these investigations. So why are they trying to limit what former staffers can say to Congress?
Well, you know, from the White House point of view, they're just following a precedent which says that if anybody's going to decide what's privileged and not privileged, it's the President of the United States, and it's not Congress, and it's not a former staffer. And what they've determined is that all post-election conversations, activities, etc., that includes the transition and inside the White House, should be off limits right now. And the Democrats say, look, this is ridiculous. You're trying to muzzle people. You're trying to keep us from getting to the truth. And even Trey Gowdy, a Republican, said, you know, this is no one's definition of privilege. So on both sides in Congress, there's a little bit of consternation about it.
Then there's a reporting in Axios that Steve Bannon slipped up, actually admitted to the House Intelligence Committee that he had conversations with top White House advisors about that Trump Jr. meeting at Trump Tower.
Right. So he did slip up, talk about a meeting, and according to Axios, members were saying, well, if you talked about that meeting, why can't you talk about other meetings? And they were upset about it. Now, obviously, when he talks to the special counsel, he's going to have to talk about these meetings because it's a criminal investigation.
Yeah. Gloria, thanks very much. A lot to sort through. The perfect person to ask is Congressman Eric Swalwell, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, where Steve Bannon obviously appeared in that marathon session yesterday. I spoke with him just before airtime. Congressman Swalwell, Steve Bannon has agreed to cooperate with Mueller's investigation, but is stonewalling your committee. I'm wondering, did you get any kind of explanation as to why he'll talk freely to Mueller but not to your committee?
No, Anderson. Actually, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it also doesn't flow legally that he would be willing to talk to Bob Mueller, but under subpoena to Congress that he would not answer any of our questions. Also, the White House has been quite inconsistent, that they are asserting the privilege for not only Steve Bannon's time at the White House, but any time after the campaign during the transition, as well as even when he had left the White House. And so it appears that there's something that they don't want Steve Bannon to tell us.
And you have no doubt this is being orchestrated by the White House, that Steve Bannon, his attorneys, are consulting with the White House on all of this.
We were told by Steve Bannon's attorneys that they were on the phone as we were meeting in the Intelligence Committee with the White House. And their instructions from the White House was that Mr. Bannon could not talk about anything that happened during the transition while he was at the White House, or even recent conversations he's had with the president.
Yeah, and I mean, Sarah Sanders, it should be pointed out, also confirmed that Bannon's lawyer was relaying the committee's questions via phone to the White House, called it, quote, the same process that's typically followed. Is that the same process that's typically followed? Is that normal?
No, I hope he was not doing that, Anderson, because that would be an effort to read in the White House a committee's sensitive investigation. Now, the White House has a right to, put parameters in place for any time that Steve Bannon was at the White House, but they cannot they should not know what we're asking Mr. Bannon with respect to the campaign.
Sanders also characterized Bannon citing executive privilege as the White House following a practice that's gone back decades. Has any other administration tried to exert executive privilege, to your knowledge, for things that happened during the transition?
No, to my knowledge, that has never happened in history, and it's happening right now with Mr. Bannon. It also is not supported by any case law or any statute. And so, again, we believe this is the White House in its most aggressive way yet, trying to obstruct our investigation.
Trey Gowdy says that he's been told Bannon's coming back tomorrow. Can you confirm that? And do you think he should be held in contempt of Congress if he continues to refuse to cooperate?
I hope when he does come back and we're hoping that's soon, that the White House will clear the way. The president said, after all, that he wants to fully cooperate, and so they should allow him to testify without any parameters on his testimony. But that has to be sorted out sooner rather than later, and that's a decision by the White House. Otherwise, he should be held in contempt, and a judge to decide if he has to testify.
Finally, senior White House staffer Rick Dearborn, former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, they testified in front of your committee today. Did either of them invoke executive privilege the same way that Bannon did?
Well, Anderson, I can tell you that an executive branch, a senior-level executive branch member testified today and was asked about questions during the campaign, the transition, and this person's time at the White House, and even told us that he was under no instructions to invoke executive privilege, which shows that the White House is now selectively picking who can tell us what. Now, Corey Lewandowski is, as we speak, we're on a break right now for votes, Corey Lewandowski is continuing to refuse to answer any questions after the campaign. So this is an effort by the White House. Corey Lewandowski told us that he spoke to the president as recently as last night, but won't go into anything that was said after he left the campaign.
Congressman Swalwell, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
One quick correction. Introducing Gloria Borger, I mistakenly called Congressman Swalwell the committee chairman. He is, in fact, a member of Republican. Devin Nunes chairs the committee. The ranking Democrat, I should point out, of course, is Adam Schiff. Just ahead, some high-level conflicting opinions on executive privilege, perhaps not surprisingly, both coming from the White House. Our panel weighs in ahead.
Danish design is practical, honest. What we try to do, that is maybe somewhat of...
Chief of Staff for Legislative Affairs, Mark Short. Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Samuel.
In the last hour, we spoke with Congressman Ruben Gallego. He's a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and he confirmed publicly that the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, said that what the president used to say during the campaign about a border wall, other immigrations, represented uninformed opinions at that time. The president was uninformed. Your reaction?
I was there in the meeting, Wolf. I don't remember the general ever saying the president was uninformed.
What did he say? What do you remember?
I do think that what General Kelly said is to say that just like the president listened to his generals to help figure out the plan to defeat ISIS, he's listened to people on the field in CBP and come up with a better border plan, which is different, admittedly different than what he said on the campaign. Even President Trump, in the meeting that was televised on Tuesday, talked about the reality that there are places where we cannot put a wall, and that he's listened to CBP and say, here's where physical barriers are most needed to protect our country. The president is listening to the professionals. We should be celebrating that, and Democrats should be looking at it and saying, hey, he's listening to CBP to say where we need to secure our border. We should get behind that as opposed to silly stories about someone saying he was uninformed.
Because John Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff, he was just interviewed on Fox. He said President Trump has, quote, evolved in the way he looks at things and changed his attitude toward the DACA issue and even the wall. That's John Kelly himself saying that.
I agree with that. I'm not disagreeing with that. Wolf, what I'm saying is that the president's position, he's listened to CBP officials and devising what a better plan would be to secure the border. He has said that. That's different than saying he was uninformed.
Ruben Gallego said flatly, he used the word uninformed. Kelly said the president was uninformed. Other members have said exactly the same thing, not only to CNN, but to other news organizations.
Well, we should be celebrating the fact that CBP has come forth with a plan to secure our border. We should be getting Republicans and Democrats on board as opposed to, once again, having some controversy about a word that was used in a meeting. I don't recall General Kelly saying the president was uninformed. He said this is how our decision has evolved. This is what's needed. We should be getting behind the professionals who are on the line securing our border every day and telling us what they need to secure our border.
But it seems that Republican leaders in the Senate and the House, they're still confused precisely where the president stands. Even the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Listen to what he said just a little while ago.
I'm looking for something that President Trump supports, and he's not yet indicated what measure he's willing to sign. As soon as we figure out what he is for, then I would be convinced that we were not just spinning our wheels going to this issue on the floor.
All right, so what needs to be in the bill for the president to sign it?
I think we've been crystal clear with all of Congress on that.
Well, so why is he confused?
That's a good question, Wolf. We've been crystal clear with him and his staff as well. What we've said is we need a physical barrier. We need to end chain migration. We need to end the diversity lottery visa program. And we're willing to address DACA. Those are the concrete things that we need. They're the 4 pillars we've agreed to talk about. And we've put forward our plans in each of those areas.
because Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator who's trying to come up with a compromise that would allow the 700,000 Dreamers to remain here in the United States, he says flatly there's a Tuesday Trump, referring to one meeting last week, as opposed to a Thursday Trump when the president had a very different perspective, rejecting the compromise. Which version is Congress negotiating right now? What the president said on Tuesday, he wants a bill of love. He's open to whatever compromise you come up with. I'll take the heat. You remember the president said all of that, or a very different President Trump in that Thursday meeting?
Wolf, there's no difference. What he has said in that meeting on Tuesday was to talk about the whole group at that table, which represented a lot of diverse viewpoints. Senator Graham has been a constructive voice in this and has been very helpful, but the plan he brought forward was a very narrow plan, worked through just a few members in his own group, working group. We said we want to have a plan that others could agree to as well. That's the difference. It's not a Tuesday versus Thursday. It's Senator Graham and Senator Durbin trying to bring to the president a plan that has not been signed off on by others. When we left the meeting on Tuesday, the four leaders, McCarthy, Hoyer, Durbin, and Cornyn, agreed they would be the ones organizing the meetings moving forward. We met with them today. We're making progress. But the Durbin...
Making progress that part of the spending bill to keep the government operating would also include Dreamers?
I don't see that that's going to happen, Wolf. I think that the reality is that we're going to face another CR, which is disappointing to all of us.
A continuing resolution to keep it going until mid-February.
That's right. And that's frustrating to us because we put forward our budget back in February. Here we are now, 11 months later, with Congress still not having a spending bill in place.
But you've flatly rejected the Lindsey Graham, Dick Durbin deal, the compromise.
I think that the Lindsey Graham, Dick Durbin deal is still what's being used by the four leaders as a baseline. We think that it's important that they've narrowed the focus of those four pillars we asked for, which is a step in the right direction. But in each of those categories, we felt that Durbin and Graham did not go far enough. And that's what we're trying to improve.
Is the government going to shut down?
Well, I don't think the government's going to shut down. I think that it's more important that we make sure our troops are continuing to be funded, our national security is funded, government workers are funded. That is the plan. I think that we'll get there this week.
In this Reuters interview, the president said the Lindsey Graham, Dick Durbin compromise is the opposite of what he campaigned on, and now you're saying maybe that could be the basis for some sort of compromise.
I think it's in all four of those areas it needs to be substantially improved. The border security element the president campaigned on is what we're still asking for. CBP presented to Congress last week a $33 billion plan, of which 18 was physical structure. The Durbin-Graham proposal provided 1 year, $1.6 billion of funding, and even in that, it tied our hands in saying no new dollars can go for new technologies. We're constantly testing new prototypes for the wall. So they're basically tying our hands and saying we can't use those
funds.
funds.
The problem you have to keep the government operating. You need a simple majority in the House, 218 votes. I suspect you can probably get that. But in the Senate, you need 60. You have 51 Republicans. You need a bunch of Democrats to support it. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, says there's widespread revulsion among Senate Democrats to voting on a short-term spending bill.
Well, 2 points there. One, I think it would be very challenging for Senator Heitkamp or Senator Manchin or Senator Tester or Senator Donnelly to say, I'm not going to fund our troops because I want to make sure we do something for illegal aliens at DACA.
So you think you have 60 votes?
I think that's difficult for Democrats in the Senate. But we share the frustration that Congress should be doing its job. And they've not done their job. They've not given us a spending bill, even though we've had a budget that was submitted in February. The fiscal year ends in September. Here we are in January without a funding bill.
And you know, there's a Republican majority in the House and a Republican majority in the Senate.
But we also need 10 votes in the Senate. In the Senate so far, Democrats have been unwilling to allow a motion to move forward on those appropriations bills.
Yeah. All right. We'll see what happens. Lindsey Graham, by the way, says he's not going to vote for this continuing resolution. You got a lot of work to do over the next 48 hours.
We always do.
Mark Short, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it very much. Much more news right after this.
Danish design is practical, honest. What we try to do, there may be some